Hi folks, welcome to this video on methods of guidance. Again, this could be one of the essay topics to do with coaching or instructing. There are four types of ways that we can offer guidance to athletes: visual, verbal, manual, mechanical. So we're just going to look at each one and see what we need to put down if a question comes up on this in the exam. So as you'd expect, visual guidance is watching. Watching what? Watching a demonstration. It could be watching DVD analysis. It can be looking at photographs. Even when your coach holds up that board with magnets stuck on it showing your formation for today's game or whatever, and they're showing where you should be operating and when you should be cutting inside and things like that. That is a form of visual guidance. So we're looking at things in order to understand what we need to do. Okay, so verbal guidance, as you'd expect, talking and listening, giving someone a verbal instruction, them listening to what you've got to say. What we often find is it's very rare that you do one without the other. We both do. So we will both use visual and verbal guidance together. It's a very rare situation where we just use one and not the other. So these two we often use in combination. Okay, so manual guidance is hands-on, I've put in inverted commas. It's very much helping, assisting, supporting performers when they're doing certain movements. Classic example of a sport that uses a lot of manual guidance is gymnastics. When someone's like doing a handstand or a forward roll or doing a balance and you're helping and supporting them in position, whether doing a handspring or something like that, you will be there with your hands up ready to support them and offer them some guidance as to correct body position. And finally, the mechanical guidance, quite similar to manual guidance in that you're giving some kind of physical support to them, physical assistance, but you're using things like harnesses, bracing, taping to give that physical support as opposed to your hands. Other more common, forms of mechanical guidance are things like floats when you go swimming, the float boards that you hold on to or the boards that you put between your legs to give your body some kind of physical support. Okay, so dealing with visual guidance first, certain things we need to take into consideration. It's going to be good for all sets of performers, cognitive and autonomous, but what we might need to give is an example of how we can use it differently for each. You're not just going to give visual guidance to a cognitive or an autonomous performer or anyone in between, but what you're going to give it to all. Everyone receives visual guidance, but what might change is the method that you use. So a cognitive performer is going to probably watch a role model, a coach, someone on DVD that they admire, someone from the last weekend's game or competition. Whereas an autonomous learner is probably going to watch themselves, watching video replays of the game that they've just participated in or something like that. So they're getting some kind of visual guidance on what needs to be done and what needs to be improved for next time. So the complexity of the skill is also going to play a factor in visual guidance. Things you've got to think about. You might have to slow the demonstration down if you are doing a very, very complex skill. If it's relatively simple, you might do it at full competition speed. So that's just another factor that you've got to take into consideration. Okay, so it's quite a good technique to use on large groups. Get everyone together, demonstration, off you go practice. Okay, so everyone can see it, but then what you've got to make sure is everyone paying attention. You've got to make sure you have their attention so that they are learning from your demonstration. Again, time is another factor that we've got to take into consideration, but generally, demonstrations are quite time efficient, so we may as well add that. If that old phrase, a picture paints 1,000 words, I can show everyone what they need to do in a few seconds, whereas if I try to describe it, it might take me a lot longer. So it's generally quite a time-efficient method to give visual guidance. And it's also quite a good way to highlight any danger. With a demonstration, I can show where the danger exists and what they need to do to minimise the danger, and where an incorrect technique may cause an increased risk of injury. So, highlight that fact before we let them have a practice. And that leads me on to my final point of visual guidance. This demonstration that we are showing must be accurate. If I give an inaccurate demonstration, they're all going to copy it and they're all going to do the wrong technique. That's going to lead to problems in technique and also an increased risk of danger. So these are the factors I've got to take into consideration when I'm doing visual guidance. Okay, so verbal guidance then, speaking and listening and describing what you need to do. Do you know what? it's the same factors that we're going to talk about here again that affect whether you should use verbal guidance. Again, you're not going to use verbal guidance on cognitive and not on autonomous or vice versa, but the type of verbal guidance you are going to use is going to, the type of person you're working with is going to influence the type of verbal guidance that you're giving. If I'm working with a cognitive performer, a beginner, I'm going to use simple language. If I'm working with an autonomous performer, I'm going to use technical terminology, okay, to stretch and challenge them a little bit more. Again, the complexity of the skill is going to play a part, okay, in terms of the language that I use, how much I need to speak. Do I need to let them have a go, then repeat, let them have a go, and come back again and keep giving them bits of information? Or is it simple so I can just tell them what to do in one go? It's a factor that I've got to consider. Group size is again a factor. Now what I've got to think about here is it could be quite good to give a big verbal instruction to a large group, but it's going to be difficult to give individual feedback and individual guidance to a large group. So the bigger the group size, if I've got a large group, there's going to be less differentiation. I'm not going to be able to differentiate my comments. I'm not going to be able to talk to them individually. Okay, if I have a small group, the exact opposite is true. I'm going to have more differentiation. So I'll just write more differentiation, remember, is setting different challenges to people based on their ability levels. I can't assume that everyone's the same ability level. So I've got to make sure I set realistic challenges and goals and give guidance that's appropriate to each performer. That's going to be more difficult in a large group. It's going to be simpler in a small group. Again, the level of danger is going to play a part in that as well. If there's high danger, I'm going to have to be quite verbal and maybe tell people what to do. If there's less danger, my verbal guidance might be quite minimal. So that's again another factor I've got to take into consideration. And finally, linked in with that, the time available. If I've got lots of time, I might do a lot of verbal guidance. I'm not going to talk needlessly, but I might take that opportunity to talk people through what they need to know and make sure they've understood it. If I'm quite tight for time, my verbal guidance might be quite brief, might be short, sharp and to the point. So again, these are all factors I've got to take into consideration when I'm giving verbal guidance. But before I forget, I've just added one quick one, motivation. What do we do as coaches quite a lot? When do we talk? When someone's flagging a little bit, when they're struggling, when their head's down. So we can also use verbal guidance to offer quite a bit of motivation to our performers. I've written up there because sometimes, cognitive and autonomous lack a little bit of motivation sometimes. So verbal guidance is going to help with that. Now you should be seeing a pattern emerging, which is why I've got straight to the point with this one. It's the same factors over and over again that are going to influence what type of guidance we should be using. So what we've got here again, manual guidance, this is where I'm going hands-on. Okay, I'm going to give them support and assistance. Now, I'm probably going to give more support and assistance, physical support, to cognitive learners because they need that little bit of support. However, even Tom Daly, when he's doing his complex dive routines, is going to have a coach who's going to give him manual guidance. So an autonomous learner like Tom Daly is going to need some kind of physical support when he's learning a routine for the first time. So again, these are both factors I need to take into consideration when I'm using manual guidance. This one's quite straightforward. I'm going to use manual guidance when the skill is quite complex because they actually need me to go hands-on. They need me to provide physical support to them during a certain routine. And that equally is going to help minimise the danger, or should minimise the danger. Okay? The problems are, if I'm going to go manual guidance, if I'm going to go hands-on, it is quite a time-consuming method. And that's made even more time-consuming if my group size is large. So when am I really going to use manual guidance? When I've got lots of time available and my group size is quite small. So again, these are factors I've got to take into consideration. I've just added there the overall advantage of manual guidance over something like visual and verbal guidance. The key is they're getting an instant feel for the movement. What it should feel like, you don't get that with visual and verbal guidance. You know what it looks like. You can try and turn the verbal description into pictures in your head, but with manual guidance you get an instant feel for it. But, as with everything, there's going to be a bit of a downside to this. That downside is they can become dependent on it. Okay, so at some point you've got to take those hands away, and they've got to do it unaided, unassisted, and that can be daunting, and the movement can go to pieces a little bit. So, there are pros and cons to all these methods. Those are the key pros and cons to manual guidance. And finally, mechanical guidance. Surprise, surprise, look what's cropping up again. What factors do we need to take into consideration? Well, mechanical guidance, again, it's going to be good for cognitive and autonomous performers. If they need a harness, if they need a brace, if they need support, you can use it with both of them. Cognitive, they're going to need it probably for every skill that they're doing, okay? Whereas autonomous, they're probably going to need it for the really complex ones that they're trying out for the first time. Leads me down onto this, the complexity of the skill. Again, chances are you're only going to really use mechanical guidance when it's a complex skill, something that they haven't got their head around yet and they need a little bit of support and you can't offer it hands-on. The classic one there is the harnesses that you wear when you're doing trampolining. Okay, you'll see them in shopping centres now where there's kids jumping on trampolines and there's a harness, with 4 elastic bands keeping them tethered over the trampoline at all time. That's been developed from how they train gymnasts and trampolinists when they're practicing difficult routines. What is it great for? Minimising the risk of danger. If it goes wrong, you are still fully supported, okay? However, it's time consuming to offer everyone mechanical guidance, and again, it only works well if the group sizes are small. Again, just like manual guidance, you do get a feel for the movement. That harness, that taping, that strapping, that bracing can hold your body into position and let you know exactly how it should feel. But again, the downside, they can definitely become dependent on it. Okay? One thing I would say as well, linked in with that, with the key form of it, it's a great method for building confidence. They know that if they get it wrong, they are supported. Okay? But again, what happens when you take it away? That confidence can drop again. So that can be a factor. So what you've got to do in a question like this is, which type of guidance are they talking about? Is it one of them, two of them, all of them? And then you've got to read the question. It might say advantages, disadvantages. It might say what the factors. What we've done is the factors. But then you in doing that, we've also identified when it's useful and when it's not so useful. What are the advantages? What are the disadvantages? So you've got to be aware of all these factors and tailor it towards the question. Okay? Good luck with it all, folks.